Point in time, I would like to invite Joel. And Joel and I go back to about early 2000s, 2004, all the way back to Brisbane. And I know that I was much younger. Joel was still young then and still is. And Joel, we are absolutely delighted that you have agreed to share your life story with us. And I also would like to greet some of your friends who have joined us via Zoom this morning, and those who have come in person, such as Ian and Andrew. But let me pray with you before you start. Our gracious Father in heaven, Lord, what a joy it is to be able to open our hearts and share with others what you have done in our lives. And Lord, as Joel shares some of things from his life with us, we pray that you'll just guide him and bless him. And Lord, that the words that he will speak from his story will resonate with us so we can learn, understand a bit more how you work in other people's lives, and maybe reflect a bit more how you work in our life. And Lord, we pray for your blessings over Joel and also this gathering, both here in physical location and online. We thank you in Jesus' name. Amen. Joel, the microphone is yours. You have two, one here and one there, so that one.
Yeah.
Joel, I'll go and sit and you share with us.
All right, thank you. All right, how do I do the slides? You just say next one. Hello, everyone. For those who don't know me, I'm Joel. As David mentioned, we go back quite a while, so it's my second time here, and hopefully you enjoy this. Huh? Yeah. All right, thanks. All right, so this is the title of it, Adventures in a Desert and How God Got Me There. It was wasn't that easy. All right, so let's start, I guess. So why the desert? The desert is what I refer to as my roughly 2 years in Egypt. And yeah, I was a volunteer missionary there. I was a volunteer school teacher in an Adventist-run school over there for two school years. This verse sort of resonates with me. I said, who am I going to send? Send me. I'll go. And yeah, that's sort of how I got there. But anyway, we're going to get to that in a minute. So this is Sharif. He was one of my more interesting students. So it was an Adventist-run high school on the very outskirts of Cairo. Sharif used to ask me a lot of interesting questions, ones I won't go into now. If you want to talk to me after, that's fine. So I'm just trying to go off my slides here. So this was run through Adventist volunteers. They send missionaries. This was my student missionary card. This was displayed at Big Camp the year I went over, which was 2014. So I was there 2014 to 2016. It was good. Sorry. Life before and the lead up. This is where we'll kind of get into it. So life before, I guess we'll start from the start. I was born in the Adventist Hospital in Sydney and raised southwest of Sydney for a number of years. Since that time, I lived up and down the East Coast, Brisbane, Cairns, Wollongong, all over the place. Then life before, I was living on the Central Coast. It was all going pretty good. Average sort of Australian life. I had a decent job, had friends around, and there's a few things going on in this photo. First one is a 20-ton excavator clearing land. So I was working just about a year before I left the first time. I switched companies to a much larger tree service company, and they had a lot more equipment, which was great for me. So I went from mainly residential tree work, dragging things out of backyards, to heavy land clearing at times, and it was great. It was a change. I was getting paid a lot better, and things were going pretty good. Second photo is my ute. I always wanted a Land Cruiser, so eventually I got one. and I was on a camping trip. I had my hammock set up. It was quite good. Life was going pretty well. And the last photo, that is a Hyosung 650. I was actually planning to buy this bike. And then the Egypt opportunity arose. So I had to make a decision. Do I buy the bike for $6,000, which is about the entire amount of money I had, or do I spend it trying to get to Egypt? Then I didn't end up buying the bike, as you can guess, because I went over there. And I didn't end up having the $6,000 for long too, because my ute ran into some problems. So I ended up spending quite a lot on that, and that put a hole in my finances trying to go to Egypt. Initially, the idea I got to go to Egypt was a couple of years before. A friend of mine, who David also knows, Herbie, he went and spent a year there. It was a good experience. I thought, that sounds good. So I wanted to go the following year, but again, I didn't get the finances. So the next year, 2014, rolled around. I made contact with the school principal around February, and from then I did a bunch of things. I did you have to do this thing called passport to missions, which I found very painful. But yeah, I didn't end up leaving till August 2014. But to get to that point, like I said, I ran out of money. So I was attending Gosford Seventh-day Adventist Church down at Narara there. And it was coming up to the time I was meant to leave in a month or less. And then another friend of mine, Robbie, he now runs Coast Life Church down at Swansea. And he said, well, maybe you can ask the pastor, see if they got any money to send you. So we went and asked the pastor. He's like, well, we don't really have the money to send anyone overseas. I'm like, oh, okay. And so he goes, but I took it to the board, and you can get up the front and ask if anyone wants to, sponsor your trip. So a week or two later, I got up the front, and I was totally unprepared. But they found some YouTube clips of the school I was going to, which is called Nile Union Academy. And yeah, it took up a collection in the congregation and basically raised just the right amount to pay for my flights over there. So to me, that's an example of God working to get me to where He wants me. Which reminds me of one of my points before I start this. This is not to say, sort of, look at me, how good, look at what I did. This is more to show where God will get you to where He wants you, what He did for me in my life. So let's move on. So first day is arriving Nile Union Academy in Egypt. So to get to NUA, you had to catch the train line all the way to the end. And then from there you had to catch what they call a microbus, which is a van full of people that drives crazy down to the school. So yeah, you can see the photos here. On the top left is the admin building. The next one is Mundau. He was one of the first students I met. He was actually a good kid. He's in Europe somewhere studying. There was a pool, a school sign. That bottom left is the entrance to the school. It's quite nice. One of a few places that had a lot of trees in Egypt. The climate doesn't rain very much, so having trees was a bit of a luxury. And when I got there, I'm like, well, I just signed up for 10 months. What am I going to do here for 10 months? Hang on. Sorry, I'll get back there. Sorry about that, technical difficulties. Me pressing random buttons. No one wants to say that, Ian. So I got to NUA. I'm like, well, I just signed up for a 10-month term. What am I going to do here for 10 months? I'm not a qualified teacher by any means. I have no idea about teaching anyone anything. Most teaching I'd done was showing you guys at work how to sharpen and use a chainsaw, which I'd barely learnt myself at that time. And so then that verse I had up there comes into it. Proverbs 3, verse 5 and 6. Trust the Lord with all your heart, not on your own understanding. So I guess in that situation, you've got to rely on Him to get you where you're going. Yeah, the pool was popular, especially in summer. Everyone asks, does it get hot over there? Yes, it does, but it's no hotter than here. The difference is, after 3 or 4 days of heat here, we get a nice southerly change come through and everything cools down. There is no such thing. It's just hot all the time. Until it gets to winter, then it's unusually cold. So, yeah, there's some more photos from my time, mainly pathfinders. So, on the bottom left is Brenna. She was another volunteer from Western Australia, the only other Australian volunteer. Oh yeah, sorry, I'm getting mixed up in my head. But my role at NUA was a teacher, but I was a boys PE teacher, and I maintained the school's work program and did a bit of maintenance. So the school's work program, the students work for 2 hours a day at the school, and every hour they do comes off their school bill, even though they didn't say it that way because they're teenagers. So trying to get 80 students to work in the morning sometimes was difficult. Yeah, so, and PE as well. When I first got there, they tried to put one over me. Like, I got them to do push-ups, or just winging the PE lesson. I'm like, all right, do some push-ups. And there was a few thorns in the grass. Like, oh, mister, there's thorns here. We can't do push-ups. We can't do push-ups in Egypt. So I got down and did some. I said, if I can do push-ups in Egypt, you can. And then, yeah, so this is the Pathfinder Club, which was started by a Brazilian couple, Marcos and Nana. We started a Pathfinder Club in the school, and that's going well. Top left is some random Norwegian girl I got a photo with. All the boys were trying, and I just went up and asked a few times. Eventually she caved in and got a photo with me. I get back on the bus, and all the boys are cheering, yeah, mister, yeah, mister. It's only a photo. Yeah, so we have a uniform there, and the bottom middle picture is at the pyramids of Giza. So, like I mentioned, getting my students to do push-ups and exercise was sometimes difficult, but showing off at the pyramids in front of a bunch of foreign tourist girls was easy. What's going on there? I'll keep going, I guess. More technical difficulties. Hang on. Yeah, sorry. Yes, and top right was Adel. Adel was the school baker. He had a bit of he had hearing difficulties, maybe a little bit of learning difficulties too. And Marcos, the Brazilian guy who started the Pathfinder Club, said if everyone only spoke as much English as Adel, the world would be a very happy place. Adel knew Jesus, love, how are you? That's about the limit of his English. So there's some more photos. On the top left, we have Abdul Masih, Athani, and what was his name? Wahid. So I don't know where the others are, but Wahid is now in Mexico studying medicine. And then in the middle we have Wasim. Wasim went to... I'm going to stop pressing things. Went to Middle East University in Lebanon, Adventist University there, now studying theology. He was, now he's doing something else in Brazil. But that's just an example of where Adventist education goes. Then on the far right is an interesting picture. This was my first trip to Upper Egypt, which is the villages down south. It's weird, it's something to do with the way the Nile flows. So Wendell there was my 20 or 21-year-old roommate. He had his birthday while we were over there, from California. And he got sick on our first trip, on our trip down there. This is one of the students' mothers, Sammy's mother. So she thought the best thing for him was more food, and he's resisting, and then, yeah. Yes, the most famous NUA resident in Australia. This is Elvis the donkey. I took over looking after Elvis pretty early on because over there, Egypt is still in a sort of old school class system. If you work with animals, you're kind of pretty low class. So none of the students really want to deal with him, and I thought it was a bit of a novelty, and I liked animals. So I took over looking after Elvis, and he's pretty famous at Gosford Church, RTM, and a few others because photos and videos have been shared. He got his name because in predominantly Muslim countries, the mosque does a call to prayer around 5 in the morning. So they shout out over their loudspeakers, and we had about 5 mosques in the school. And Elvis the donkey liked to sing with them, so that's how he got his name. So yeah, on the left he's getting rid of the wash. Then we have me giving Umtar a ride. Umtar was the son of one of the other staff families there. It's from Zimbabwe. And yeah, then just other photos of Elvis. So this I like to share. This is a Adventist church way down south in Zoic. So the city near there is called Sohag, but the church is called Zoic. And that wall separates men and women in the church. So this is an Adventist church, not a Muslim one. The pastor, it's a very old school mentality in this village. The pastor there was trying to tear the wall down, but a lot of the members said, if you take that wall down, we're not going to come, we're not going to let our wives come. So the wall remains, and yeah, they just stand at the front and speak to both sides, I guess. But yeah, it was interesting travelling down there. So this is a very summarised version of my time there. So you learned how I got there the first time. Something I forgot to mention, sorry, I'm going to keep going back and forth, is I mentioned the church raising money for me, but also the company I was working for at the time used to do what they called weekends on the rail. So you would work cutting trees on the weekend along the railway corridor, and it paid really good. It was time and a half Saturday, double time all Sunday. So guys basically made their week's wage in 2 days. And being Adventist, I didn't want to work Saturday, and I was kind of questioning, is it justifiable? Should I work Saturday to pay for this trip to go to Egypt and do mission work over there? I'm like, oh. So I rang a friend. He's like, that's between you and God, man. I'm like, all right. So I sort of prayed about it. I didn't end up going for it, but then out of nowhere, I just got a call from the office. Oh, do you want to do a week of night shift? I'm like, how much does it pay extra? She's like, yeah, it's time and a half a week. I'm like, oh, okay. So that also helped my finances getting to Egypt. So just God using other means and people to get me to where he wanted. So then the end of my 10 months came. I flew back to Australia. I went back to my old company. That was interesting too. I went back to Bob, the manager. I said, Bob, can I have a job? He's like, yeah, come see me. So I went down to Sydney and saw him. This was one of the larger companies in Sydney at the time. So I went in his office and he goes, let's just say I'll give you a job, then you take off in a few months. I said, well, Bob, might actually be 6 weeks. Because the principal wanted me back in Egypt. I'm like, yeah, I kind of want to go back too. So he's like, I said, it's not really worth your time, is it? He's like, no. So then he thought about it. He goes, actually, I've got this contract runs till sort of mid-July. You can do that. Then when that finishes, you can just hang around and do whatever till you go off again. I'm like, all right, thanks. So I went back to work for my old company. Actually, things went pretty good really quick. I started off on stunt grinding, which is a bit boring, but then soon after that, I was given my own truck and chipper to take home. So a company vehicle to take home. I was running my own crew on the Central Coast. A couple of guys fresh out of high school and were cleaning up after the storm, so I didn't actually do that much because most of it was done. So it was a pretty cruisy gig. I was getting paid well. And I was getting pretty comfortable. And as a friend described in her testimony, I was getting on this lazy river, just cruising through life. And then I said, well, I went to this travel expo in Sydney. I was talking to the travel agent there and said, I want to go to South America. I've always wanted to go to South America. So I said to her, I want to go to South America, but also might have to go back to Egypt. So she did some searching. She says, oh, there's a really good deal on it at the moment from Sydney to Cairo, Cairo to Buenos Aires. I'm like, okay. And she told me the price and I booked it. I'm like, oh, cool. Then after that, started getting second thoughts. Like, oh, did I make the right decision? Did I just fork out a heap of money for the wrong reasons? And then I said to God, if you want me to go back, give me a sign and give me the money. So I carried on as normal. I was getting comfortable, just sitting in my truck thinking about it, and then thinking, you know what, I'm just going to cancel these flights. It'll be a couple of $100 out of pocket, but it's saving heaps at the same time. Maybe I made the wrong decision. Then I went and continued working, and I got the money. maybe it's not in chronological order, maybe I got the money first, but anyway. So I ended up getting the money. That's a story for another time. And then, so I got the money, right, I got the money, but I still kind of need a sign, like that's the right thing for me to do. So I'm thinking about it, sort of praying about it a bit, maybe not as much as I should have. Then I went down to visit a good friend of mine in Sydney. And yeah, I was cruising along with him one Saturday morning, went to his kids' soccer game, and on the way to another friend who was the chaplain at Church in the Fields at Macquarie Fields down there. So along the way, one of my students from Egypt, Ramon, sends me a voice message saying, mister, it was very nice to meet you. I hope we can meet you again one day somewhere. Maybe you come back here, maybe, I don't know. So I was then and I was kind of questioning to my friend who I'd grown up with, and he goes to me, man, go back. You made an impact on this kid's life. You go back. He's like, I got a missus and 2 kids. I can't do the things you're doing. He's like, I don't regret it, but I can't do the things you're doing. So I said, oh yeah, kinda, whatever. Then I got to church. Never been in this church before. Hadn't seen my friend Landry in a couple of years. Like I said, I was getting all these doubts in my mind. I don't know what to do. Maybe I made the wrong choice. So I get there and Landry had something. He goes, oh, hey mate, how you going? I've got to go over here and do something, but the Sabbath school's out there. So I'm like, yeah, all right. So I went out there. I went to the Sabbath school and they started talking about once you start stepping out in faith for God, you're going to get a lot of doubts in your mind. And it was 100% to what I was thinking. Not a coincidence. It was too much to be a coincidence. And yeah, so I'm like, all right, that's my sign. I'll go back. And I shared that at that church. I said, I've been looking for a sign to go back. And so that was it. And a week or 2 later, I was on a plane back to the desert. So this is in my 2nd year. I got the opportunity to travel in Egypt because it's a lot closer to everywhere than Australia. So this is old city of Jerusalem in Israel. I went there and slept on the roof of a hostel. It was pretty cool. But I put this there to remind me of a story. So another time God looked after me. So as I was leaving Israel, I didn't really want to pay the whole price for a shuttle service to the airport. I was a volunteer still, and Israel exchange rate was not good for a volunteer. So I spoke to the guy at the hostel. He's like, oh yeah, just catch one to Tel Aviv, ask him to drop you off at the exit and just walk. It's only a couple of Ks. I'm like, oh yeah, cool. So first I find this shuttle to Tel Aviv, this van going to Tel Aviv. And I'm pleading with the driver, please drop me off. He's like, no, please come, they take me. He didn't speak much English, I didn't speak much Arabic. So I was broken English, broken Arabic. So I eventually convinced him to drop me off at the exit after a lot of convincing. I'm like, shotgun. He's like, hurry up, go. So I did. Anyway, I started walking up this exit towards the airport because I had to get back to Egypt for a wedding. So I started walking up. Turned out to be a lot more than a couple of Ks. So anyway, I'm walking along, and then I see this checkpoint up ahead. I'm like, oh yeah, they'll ask me a few questions when I get there. Standard procedure. So as I'm walking, I'm still a few hundred metres out. I see these 2 guys walking towards me, both Israeli soldiers, both carrying automatic weapons. So interesting part was as they get closer, one keeps walking towards me, the other one sort of comes out to the side. So I'm thinking if I attempt to do something to this dude's going to drop me. So anyway, but they were actually pretty cool. They're like, what are you doing here? I'm like, oh yeah, the hostel driver told me to catch a taxi out here and walk. He's like, oh yeah. So probably apologies for our taxi drivers. They can be a bit, different. And then, but they were cool. They asked for my passport, a few details where I was going at. Then I got to then as I walk by them, they get on the radio, blah, 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 Australian, blah, 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 in Hebrew. And anyway, I keep walking up the airport, was heavily questioned on my trying to get through security there. They literally searched and swabbed everything I had, including a plastic bag I had stuff in, and said, after all that, you didn't find anything. Aren't you a bit disappointed? And they're like, no, Israeli airport security doesn't joke around. So anyway, I flew back to Egypt and continued my 2nd year. So I finished my 2nd year in Egypt. Then, as I mentioned earlier, I had the opportunity to go to South America. Started in Buenos Aires, travelled around there for a while, and went over to Chile and kind of kept looking for trouble and didn't find me. And that top picture there is a Chilean riot truck and spraying tear gas at people. I was always looking for a riot. It seemed exciting. I never actually found a good one. But so I was in Chile. And next, the other picture there is in Bolivia. So in Bolivia, in La Paz, is very high up. So I flew in from Santiago in Chile to La Paz in Bolivia, the El Alto airport. So Santiago, Chile was about 500 metres above sea level, and the airport where you fly into is 4,100 metres. So I got altitude sickness, and they recommend going 2,000 metres a day max and chill out there for a few days. I went 3,500 metres in about 4 hours. So I was totally unprepared for it. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll be all right. And as soon as I got out of the airplane, I started feeling things in my chest. I was having difficulty breathing, being asthmatic, it didn't help. So, yeah, and then another random instance. I was wondering, I got recommended to try this tea and these caffeine pills. They didn't help. I was too far gone. Had a mad headache. I could not think straight. I was wandering around outside the terminal. Then this random German girl comes up to me and goes, "Where are you going?" I'm like, "La Paz." She's like, "Where in La Paz?" I'm like, "La Paz." She's like, "Get in a taxi." So I got in a taxi, and he got me to the hostel I was going to and charged me double price, even though he already had a fare from her. But so I got there, and I was feeling a bit better. So, like, the altitude sickness was sort of going away a bit. So I met these two English girls there and did a free walking tour of the city the next day with one of them. And that street is in La Paz, Bolivia, and they are very steep. So I did that walking tour, and by the end of it, I could barely breathe, and it was a mess. And then, so I had to get to a lower altitude fast. And also happening at this time was a riot. There was about 5,000 miners going to war with the police and government, so all roads out of La Paz were blocked except for maybe a couple. And the flights were booked out too. Everyone was trying to get out, so I couldn't go there. And then these English girls were going, "Oh yeah, we're going to this other place, Carico, but we might not leave for another couple of days." I'm like, "I need to get out now." So I thought I was catching a bus to Carico, but it was actually a place called Chulamani, which was 70 k's away. So I got there, and I was feeling better from the altitude sickness, and I'm like, well, how do I get over to this other place? So I started catching random buses with my limited Spanish. A shuttle taxi driver took me to the end of his run, and we couldn't communicate. So I'm like, well, what do I do now? Then thankfully I found this other Bolivian family. One of them spoke English, and they sort of guided me on the rest of my way. So it's just another example of God continuing to watch over me and leading me, keeping me safe, because my Spanish is terrible. So this is, on the right, is me leaving Egypt. I dressed like that. That's the traditional Egyptian robe, the galabao. I did that one because it was comfortable, and I also came back to Australia like that to get a rise out of airport security. And on the left is at the end of my travels. So I went to Argentina, Chile, Bolivia, the US, and Canada. And by the time I got to Canada, I was broke. I had about $40 to my name. And but in the US, before that, I did not have enough money to book a flight home. So I'm like, because I had some traffic infringements while I was over here, and all my letters went to my grandfather's place, who's not good with technology at all. And he just put them in a drawer till I got back. So I found out the hard way, if you don't pay your fines, the government just takes it from your bank account. So I actually ran out of money, didn't have enough money to book my flight home. Then eventually, I don't know how, but my grandfather just randomly decided to donate me a few $100s, and that was just enough to buy my plane ticket. I had about $40 to my name. So I booked my ticket, caught the train from Seattle to Vancouver, wandered around there for 5 hours and flew back to Sydney. And didn't have any money for a few weeks till I could get a job. Moving on, what I'm doing now. So I came back at the end of 2016. And what I'm doing now is, I'm in my final year, hopefully, of studying environmental health. So environmental health is to do with public health and the environment. So anything that affects the public health, we look to manage it. So that picture on the right I took from Minnesota Department of Health. So there's the credit. So yeah, noise, air, water, land, anything like that. And hopefully by November, or in November, I'll finish, become an environmental health officer. You can do that for council, but what I would like to do is go back to places like Egypt and improve their local environmental areas to improve the public health. For example, in my first year in Egypt, all the rubbish was put into these barrels. We poured it all into a pit and burned it. And then for 2 days, there was a big black cloud hanging over the school, making it difficult to breathe. But then the second year, Ronnie, this Brazilian guy, came and started a recycling program, cleaned it all up, cleared about 200 tonnes of rubbish from the side street. And just simple things like that have improved the public health of that area greatly. And if you want to look that up, look up Think Green Recycle Centre on Facebook or Instagram. So yeah, this is my appeal to you, I guess. If you have the opportunity to go serve, whether it be here or somewhere else, if God's given you the opportunity to do something, go do it. Like, you're going to make an impact on yourself and others. Someone who know me know I like sharing memes, which are the pictures on the right. So I love that meme. It says, God gave you a fingerprint that no one else has, so you can leave an imprint that no one else can. So your impact is going to be different to everyone else. And on the right, yeah, it's a Bible verse related to that quote. God doesn't call the qualified, he qualifies the called. I'm sure you've heard that. So, like I said, I was not a school teacher. I was a tree lopper. I still am. I didn't know how to teach, but I made it work in a foreign country for 2 years with an English barrier, and my students still contact me to this day. And that's pretty much it. Thanks for listening.
Okay, Joel. Thank you. Stay there, Joel. Let me just grab this mic. Thank you, Joel. That's very, very special. Very special testimony of God's leading. And there's a bit of an echo there. Joel, you mentioned that to me, not to everyone here, that there were some positions in that school. Have they been filled in?
Not to my knowledge. They are looking not at the school specifically, but in another city in Egypt called Asyut. They're looking for a global mission pioneer couple. So that is a couple who are willing to go there. It's a paid position, teach English and be involved with Pathfinders. It's not highly paid. It's decent for the area, but it's actually terrible for Australia.
So it's a local pay?
It's a local pay.
It's a local pay.
It's enough to live reasonably comfortably on there. They're also looking for a female volunteer preschool teacher.
Okay. So there are some missionary opportunities. Joel, would it be right to say that because you have ventured into this venture with God, that your life was impacted in a way that you would have never been impacted on just by staying in Australia?
Very much so. Those who know me before I left and came back said I was a completely different person, a lot more confident, a lot closer in my walk with God. And studying was a big thing for me. Since I got out of school, I just worked in manual labour sort of roles, labour hire, construction, then I got into trees. I'm like, why would I ever go study at uni? It's just not me. It's not my thing. Then here I am a few years later, nearly finished a degree.
Praise the Lord. Isn't that amazing how God is able to stretch us if you're willing?
Yeah,
and that's just amazing.
The study in itself is amazing because I have ADHD, so I get distracted super easily. And just to get through this much study is a miracle in itself.
It truly is. Now, I just would like to do what we usually do here. Joel, I hope you don't mind. You may have a question for Joel. You may just want to reflect on something that he said. I certainly have something that really challenged me on in your presentation, but I'm not going to be the first. and then, so you might have a question. You may reflect on something that Joel mentioned, or you may just affirm Joel in your words for the journey that he had. So if anybody would like to say anything, Alan. Okay, Alan, I'll give you, because of the recording, I'll give you the microphone. Okay.
That traditional outfit that you wore back to get a rise, did you get a rise?
Oh, yeah.
So, and is it comfortable to wear in those conditions over there? Like, Does it make sense to wear clothes like that?
It kind of does. It's very loose fitting. It's very traditional, so it's you won't see it too much in Cairo or the cities. If you go into the villages, it's a lot more common, where a lot of the students were from. And speaking of the rise, the first time I got back, pretty much nothing happened. One security airport police guy gave me a quick look up and down, and that was about it. Second time I got back, I actually came back from Vancouver in the US, as you saw, but I was wearing that outfit. I wasn't brave enough to wear it in the US, but I wore it at the airport. So I got back, and I was going through security, and I was about to pick up my bag, and a guy comes up to me. He goes, can I see your travel card? I'm like, yeah, here you go. And he's like, oh, where are you coming from? I said, oh, the US. Like, oh, it says here you spent a lot of time in Egypt. I'm like, yeah, I did. I was a teacher over there. Anyway, so he goes on, oh, you mind coming with me? I'm like, yeah, sure. So I go with him, and then he goes, you mind if we look through your bag? And I'm like, yeah, go for it, man. So then he starts looking through my suitcase. Then his manager comes up to him, and they have a quiet talk, and like, I didn't hear all of it, but she's like, no, you're right, keep doing what you're doing. So anyway, he goes, I can't remember if he stays there or goes off. So anyway, these other two guys come up with CTU written all over their gear, counter-terrorism unit. And so they start going through my bag and questioning me, like, what's with the get-up? I said, well, this is to get a reaction out of you guys. And they were pretty friendly, though. They're like going through my phone, like, oh, can we go through your phone? I'm like, yeah. He's Bible app, he might be all right. And then, they asked a few more questions. They were pretty cool, though, and asked about the climate there and things like that.
Oh, that's a very interesting experience.
But, yeah, I have a bad habit of getting reactions out of people, but I did it in a kind of controlled environment there.
Thank you. I just thought that would be a very useful outfit because there's a lot of dust, airborne dust, and so that covers your whole body, and it wouldn't be everywhere in your pockets and so on and so on because of that, All right, so are there any other yes, here we have a friend.
David, you know it's me.
Maybe just for the sake. Okay.
Unless you want me. So, Joel, what I was wondering was, you spend a lot of time with those kids, and I hope you probably developed some good friendships with them and relationships. Now, it may not be the case, but did they teach you anything?
They did. They taught me a lot of patience and some Arabic here and there, and just about different things about their culture. They're very friendly people, despite the mainstream media. They will give you pretty much anything they have on them. Like, if they're eating something and you're hanging around, they're like, you want some? And so it's just a different culture. And like, one of the things in the Passport to Mission course you do before you go over is they advise you about culture shock. And culture shock is when you get to a place like Egypt in the third world and it's completely different, so you go into a bit of a shock and you're not ready for it. Whereas I had kind of the opposite. I was prepared for it. I was excited to go the adventure. I was getting a bit sick of things here, living on the Central Coast, working in Sydney all the time. And then, so I got there, I was fine. Coming back though, I got reverse culture shock. So I got so used to things over there, how easygoing it is, I guess, in some aspects. I come back here and there's people complaining, whinging about the most minuscule things that frustrated me.
Oh, that's very, very good insight. Any other thoughts here, folks? Any other questions? Yes, Louise. Yes, thank you, Louise.
I do actually have a question. That church that you showed us where it had the division down the centre, do you know how long that may have been established for? Like how long that was actually in existence? It was an Adventist church?
It was an Adventist church. I can't say how long it's been there, but I'm assuming as long as that church has been built. It's just that culture in that village, not Egypt in general, but that village in particular.
Okay.
To go out in the street, women sort of have to get permission from their brother, husband or father to do things.
That's really what I was wondering, like, so there was that church.
Yeah.
Which I don't have a problem with because that's their tradition and that's their culture and it's not a problem. But I'm just wondering if you actually saw that also anywhere else, in any other Adventist churches.
Not to that level. Like at the school in NUA, in the chapel, we had girls sit on one side and the boys the other, but there was definitely no wall and they interacted outside. It was just, boys can get a bit rowdy in churches. And also when we did school trips, the boys caught one bus, girls caught another.
Thank you, Pete.
Joel, it's been made obvious that you're interested in things all environmental,
Yeah.
and environment has a lot to do with health, and our little group's interested in health, and I know where you were over there. It sounds like the air could have been polluted with dust and other contaminants, and
Yeah.
you know, are there many things over there that sort of impede on people's well-being physically?
Yeah. So as people mentioned, there's air quality, because it wasn't just in the school we burned the rubbish. It was pretty much everywhere except the rich suburbs of Cairo where all the foreigners live. So that's pretty common over there. You'll see it burning on the street. You'll see they don't have the same sort of garbage infrastructure system we do here. We're quite lucky to have our garbage collected once a week or once a fortnight. It's just non-existent there. They'll literally throw their rubbish on the street. Government will come along every so often, push it into a pile and burn it. Also, the local canals are just full of rubbish. So, yeah, and then there's the dust. There's no sort of real good health system over there. So if you do have a physical ailment, it's quite difficult.
Yeah. Sounds like certain parts of India.
Yeah. Probably very similar.
Okay, folks, we're coming to the end of this segment. I just want to kind of make one comment, and Louise picked up on that. Thank you, Louise, for mentioning that. You mentioned the word cultural shock. As you were talking about it, having it both ways, going there and entering it almost like a different planet.
Yeah.
You know, when you come to a place like that, you know, if there were other planets, you might be as well somewhere else, you know, in the universe. That's how we felt when we moved to a completely different culture in our missionary work in our younger days. But as I'm thinking about cultural shock, and maybe this is not the right words to use, but as Christ came into this world, the majesty of the universe, he came. There is God who is creator. There are angels who are the higher order of creation. There are human beings. And then human beings have all sorts of levels, you know, from a kingly level, a royalty, down to somebody who is a peasant or in a carpentry shop. And Christ came from the universe, from the throne of the universe. And if cultural shock is the word to use, he came and became like one of us. And then maybe he caused another shock when he went with, you know, nail prints in his hands when he returned to heaven and sat on the right-hand side of the Father. The whole universe was able to look at those nail prints of Jesus. I also would like to make a point. Louise, thank you for raising that. Going to some other culture and seeing how people do things and how they can be happy even though they have very little, and how they do some things very different from what we do, and how God reaches them in their own culture is something that we have to keep in mind. Because sometimes we may think our way is the only way. There's no other way. And this is the right way. And we may actually lose the big picture. Because so what if women are sitting here and men are sitting there and God is reaching them and saving them wherever they're sitting? But in our Western mind, oh no, this is discrimination. God is in the business of saving souls, whether there are walls there or not. And so I just hope that by God's grace our mind can be expanded, that we actually focus on the most important thing, on the most important person, and let him actually do the work of changing us. Because here we are sitting here, I can see how many different cultures we represent. Yeah. We discriminate with other walls. And yet, Ron, thank you for that. We certainly do. But in the midst of all that mess, God is in the business of saving souls. And sometimes, Ron, people wouldn't be seeking God if everything was just fine in their life. And that, if you stay with us, in the next segment I will be sharing that it is at the end of our rope that we actually experience God in a way that we would never ever experience God. Maybe we wouldn't be ready to do that. And so, how would you feel by saying the final prayer?
Sure.
Okay, I'll put you on the spot, but that's good. Okay, you just say the prayer with us, and we'll finish.
Dear Heavenly Father, thanks for giving me the opportunity to share today, and that we can come here today and mix of different cultures and all get along, and for the one purpose, worshipping you. Please be with everyone in their own journey where you guide them. And amen.
Thank you, Joel. Really, really appreciate you actually stretching yourself further, because is this your first public testimony? Testimony?
Yeah. I've given a presentation on Egypt before, but not the whole sort of testimony.
Fantastic. We thank you for that. We appreciate that. And keep doing this, because your story is yours, just like that thumbprint. Nobody else has your story.
That's it.
And we've been blessed. Thank you so much. God bless. Yes. Amen. Folks, we will take 10-minute break.